When the call came in, it sounded like any other fire. A car burning in the middle of nowhere. But what the responding officers found inside that twisted metal shell would crack open a story far darker than anyone expected. It was just after midnight when a local farmhand in the outskirts of Scarsdale, Victoria, Australia, noticed an eerie orange glow flickering above the tree line. He assumed it was a grass fire, nothing unusual this time of year. But the flames weren't wild. They were compact, contained, focused. He drove closer, expecting to see an abandoned vehicle, maybe stolen and dumped. What he found was a silver hatchback completely engulfed in fire. The windows shattered, tires melted. The fire brigade arrived quickly, but by then, the damage was irreversible. When the flames finally died down, a charred body was discovered in the driver's seat, unrecognizable, fused to the interior. At first, authorities thought it was a tragic accident, a drunk driver, a suicide. Australia had seen them before, but this was different. The car wasn't stolen. It was registered to Hannah McGuire, a 23-year-old primary school teacher from Ballarat, known for her shy demeanor and quiet smile. Her family hadn't heard from her in hours, which wasn't like her. They were already worried. The forensic team started their sweep just as the sun rose over the horizon. What they found inside the car told a very different story. There was no damage to the front end, no collision marks. The airbag hadn't deployed, and there was a smell under the scorched metal. Not just gasoline, but something else. Accelerant. This fire had been set intentionally. The position of the body was also telling. Hannah hadn't collapsed at the wheel. She had been placed there. Her body was angled, limp, not natural. There were ligature marks on her wrists. Within 24 hours, the coroner confirmed the horrifying truth. Hannah had died before the fire started. Cause of death, blunt force trauma to the head, followed by asphyxiation. This wasn't a crash. This wasn't a suicide. This was murder, and someone had gone to great lengths to make sure her body vanished in flames. Back in Ballarat, her friends and coworkers were stunned. Hannah was quiet, private. She loved kids, books, and going on long walks. There was no sign she was in danger, but behind the scenes, detectives were already looking at someone close to her. Someone with a history, someone with a motive. Lachlan Young, her ex-boyfriend. They had dated for almost 2 years. The relationship had been rocky, filled with long silences, arguments, and sudden breakups. Lachlan had a temper. Friends said he didn't take rejection well. And just 3 days before Hannah was found, neighbors had heard yelling from her apartment. Police tracked Lachlan's movements. His car had been spotted near the crime scene. His phone pinged in Scarsdale just minutes before the fire was reported. And more importantly, he had no alibi. But the most chilling clue came from Hannah's phone, which had been tossed into a nearby creek, but miraculously recovered. In her final text, sent just hours before her death, she had written, "I'm scared. If anything happens, it's him." Lachlan Young wasn't a name that stood out. At 23 years old, he looked like any other young man in Ballarat. Average build, average background. He worked part-time in IT support, wore flannel shirts, played video games, no criminal record, no history of violence. But the thing about Lachlan is, he didn't leave a trail. He wasn't known for being aggressive in public. No arrests, no major fights. Even his social media presence was minimal, almost sterile. He didn't share photos. He didn't post much, just a string of old updates and the occasional like on Hannah's pictures. People who knew him described him as quiet, a bit awkward, and hard to read. Hannah met him at a mutual friend's birthday party in 2021. He had seemed shy, even sweet. He laughed at her jokes. He offered to walk her to her car. Within weeks, they were spending nearly every evening together. At first, it was like any new romance. Texts all day, long drives at night, Netflix, coffee dates, inside jokes. But within months, something changed. Friends noticed Lachlan growing possessive. Subtle at first, showing up unannounced, calling Hannah constantly, questioning her about coworkers. He'd get jealous if she went out with friends, even female ones. He wanted to know where she was all the time. He didn't yell. He didn't hit. He just controlled. It got worse when Hannah started pulling away. She tried to break up with him that winter, told her best friend she felt suffocated, that he didn't see her as a person anymore. But every time she tried to leave, he cried, begged, promised he'd change. And Hannah, always the peacekeeper, gave him another chance. Then came the isolation. Lachlan didn't like her spending time with her family. He'd mock her friends, tell her she was too emotional. By the time she ended it for good, early in 2024, she had quietly removed him from her socials, blocked his number, and even changed her walking routes. But Lachlan wasn't done. He created fake accounts to watch her Instagram stories, left anonymous DMS. Once he sent a delivery to her work with no name, just a single red rose. She never reported it. Maybe she thought it wasn't bad enough. Maybe she thought he'd just move on. But he didn't. In April, not long before the murder, he managed to contact her again. Said he was in therapy, said he just wanted to talk, said he was finally at peace, and Hannah, empathetic, forgiving, agreed to meet. She told her roommate it would be just coffee, in public, quick. She never came back. Investigators now had a body, a burned car, and a name, Lachlan Young, but they didn't yet have a case. There were no eyewitnesses, no murder weapon, no surveillance footage from the remote stretch of road in Scarsdale where Hannah's car had been found. To build a timeline, detectives turned to the one witness that never lies: data. They pulled tower pings from Lachlan's phone. Over a 48-hour period, his device had traveled from Ballarat to Scarsdale, then back in the dead of night. At precisely 1:12 a.m., his phone was within a mile of the fire. What's more disturbing, by 1:20 a.m., the phone went dark, switched off completely. Not low battery, not airplane mode. Office deliberate, intentional. Then came the second thread: toll camera footage. Though there were no traffic cameras directly on the rural road where the car was found, a toll reader near Ballarat caught a silver Toyota Corolla, Lachlan's registered car, traveling westbound just hours before the fire. Onboard GPS from the car's dealership app gave even more detail. The car had stopped for 9 minutes near the site of the fire, long enough to park, to pour accelerant, to light the match. Inside the burned vehicle, forensic investigators found a melted jerry can cap near the passenger seat, remnants of a charred shoelace, later matched to a pair of sneakers found in Lachlan's apartment, a phone SIM card, bent, cracked, wedged under the floor mat, later identified as Hannah's backup SIM, but the most damning evidence came from Hannah's smartwatch. Though her phone had been thrown into a creek, her watch had auto-synced to the cloud just hours before the fire. It showed her heart rate spiking violently, then dropping to 0, minutes before the fire was even set. She was already dead. That meant the fire was not just violent, it was calculated, a post-mortem cover-up, an attempt to destroy not only her body, but her story. When police confronted Lachlan at his home, he was calm, polite. He asked if he needed a lawyer. He answered every question, until they showed him a photo of Hannah's watch. His hands began to shake. He stopped talking. That night, police obtained a warrant. In his apartment, they found burned clothes in a garbage bag under the sink, a receipt for gasoline purchased just 12 hours before the murder, a hand-drawn map of rural roads around Scarsdale with one route circled in red ink. The illusion of innocence was gone, and for the first time, investigators used the word premeditated. News of Hannah McGuire's murder hit Ballarat like a gut punch. This wasn't just another statistic. This was a girl who taught second grade at the local school, who volunteered on weekends, who walked the same sidewalks as everyone else. Someone people waved to without ever knowing she was being watched, controlled, followed. The front page of the Ballarat Courier the next morning showed Hannah's school photo. young, vibrant, smiling, next to the words "found dead in flames." Vigils were held within days. Candles lined the front steps of her school. Students left notes in colored crayon. "We miss you, Miss Hannah." Teachers wept openly. Parents clutched their children a little tighter. But as the grief spread, so did something else. Outrage. The town demanded answers. Why hadn't anyone seen this coming? Why hadn't Lachlan been stopped sooner? What protections had Hannah not received? And just how many women were suffering in silence right now because they too believed their abuser wasn't dangerous enough? Social media exploded. The hashtag #Justice for Hannah began trending across Australia. Within 72 hours, it crossed borders, reaching the UK, the US, and Canada. News anchors on morning TV debated the case. Domestic violence experts were invited on air. Petitions were launched, calling for tougher laws on coercive control. Because this wasn't a random killing. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was intimate partner femicide, a slow, silent descent into possessiveness, manipulation, emotional abuse, and finally murder. Women everywhere began posting their own stories. "He followed me for weeks after we broke up. I was afraid to go to the police because he never hit me, just threatened. This could have been me," politicians responded. The Victorian Parliament began fast-tracking bills that would classify non-physical abuse as criminal offense. Domestic violence shelters received an influx of donations. For the first time in months, the Australian press wasn't focused on politics or the economy, but on a single devastating story that had peeled back the quiet terror many women live with. As for Hannah's family, they remained mostly silent until her father, David McGuire, stepped to the podium during a candlelight vigil. His voice was steady but broken. "My daughter wasn't killed in a fire. She was killed by silence, by a world that doesn't take obsession seriously until it's too late." April 30th, 2024, Ballarat Magistrates Court. The courtroom was silent when Lachlan Young was let in, wearing a gray jumper and expressionless eyes. No emotion, no tears, no acknowledgement of Hannah's family seated just feet away. He didn't look like a monster. But that's the thing about monsters. They rarely do. Prosecutors were swift. They charged him with 1 count of murder, 1 count of criminal damage by fire, and interference with a corpse. The media, crammed wall to wall, scrambled for every detail. Reporters live-tweeted the proceedings. True crime blogs lit up. The public wanted answers, and they wanted justice. The prosecution made their case clear from the start. This was a deliberate, premeditated act. The accused stalked the victim, murdered her, and attempted to destroy her remains to conceal the crime. The evidence is overwhelming, and we will prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Hannah McGuire's death was not a tragedy. It was an execution. They presented early findings. GPS pings placing Lachlan near the burn site. The accelerant used, a match to the brand found under his sink. Her broken smartwatch, logging her last heartbeat. His attempt to throw her phone into the creek, unsuccessful and damning. But even more telling was his behavior after the murder. In the hours following Hannah's disappearance, Lachlan had deleted several apps from his phone, Googled "Can bones survive car fire?" Cleared his browser history. In court, this was framed not as panic, but as premeditation. The defense, for its part, said very little. Lachlan's attorney asked for a mental health evaluation and deferred comment on the charges. He offered no plea, no emotional context, just a request for privacy and time. But time wasn't on their side, not with public outrage boiling just beyond the courthouse walls. Protesters gathered daily. Posters of Hannah's face lined the gates. Survivors of domestic abuse held vigils, wore purple, and demanded the case not be diluted into claims of mental illness or relationship gone wrong. Inside, Hannah's parents sat quietly. Her mother didn't cry. Her father didn't speak. But every time Lachlan looked forward, he had to look through them. The people who now carried the weight of their daughter's memory. The judge denied bail. Lachlan Young would remain in custody until trial. The next court date was set, and with every passing day, the weight of evidence and of the nation's eyes grew heavier. Since the arrest, the public had been waiting for one thing: a full trial that would reveal everything: his motive, the timeline, his psychological state, and the devastation Lachlan left behind. But what happened shocked everyone. At a hearing in early July 2024, after months of silence and a blank expression, Lachlan Young submitted a request to change his plea to guilty. There was no special deal, no publicly announced plea bargain. He simply surrendered. Prosecutors told the judge they would still pursue the maximum sentence, including life in prison without the possibility of parole, and if permitted under Victoria law, permanent registration as an extreme violence offender, allowing his every movement after release, if any, to be tracked forever. This guilty plea came shortly after pretrial documents were leaked, revealing Lachlan had searched for disposal sites days before his final meeting with Hannah. He had written in a private journal, "If I can't have peace, I'll make the world burn with me." The documents spread rapidly in the media. Even before the court could reseal them, excerpts from Lachlan's journal had already become headlines. "I want her silence. I want her still." Immediately, many interpreted the plea not as a sign of remorse, but as a last-ditch effort to avoid a public trial. Prosecutors did not consider the plea a form of repentance. Meanwhile, Hannah's family, who had remained silent throughout most of the legal process, finally spoke out. Her mother, through a written statement, said, "He took Hannah's life, then tried to erase her story. We will not let him choose silence again. The world will remember who she was and what he did." A few weeks after Lachlan Young's guilty plea, the Australian media began using a new term: Hannah's Law. Not because legislation had officially passed, but because the public refused to let her name disappear. They refused to let her become just another fading headline or forgotten hashtag. Hannah McGuire had become the face of something much bigger: invisible yet deadly non-physical abuse, control, manipulation, and emotional isolation that often go unrecognized, and the danger of a system that waits for bruises before it listens. In response, the Parliament of Victoria moved quickly to draft new legislation that would make coercive control, psychological abuse within intimate relationships, a criminal offense on its own. A legal system that once punished only physical wounds was now being forced to see the ones that don't bleed. At the community level, schools began launching educational programs about recognizing red flags in relationships, not just for young girls but for teenage boys too, to help stop the next Lachlan before he ever begins. And in Ballarat, the classroom where Hannah once taught now holds a small plaque that reads, "In loving memory of Ms. McGuire, may kindness be louder than control." If this story left an impact on you, let it lead to something more than silence. Subscribe for more in-depth true crime cases that honor victims and demand justice. What are your thoughts on coercive control laws? Share them below, respectfully and in memory of Hannah. Her story shouldn't fade. Share this video and keep her name alive.